Mighty Oak Stories, The Last Leaf. The mighty oak stood strong in the blustery winds. He had lived for many years, had lived through the First and Second World Wars, and in his long life had seen much stronger winds than this. The mighty oak lived in the bottom of the garden of Mrs. Rose White, and she was quite elderly now. Mighty Oak had seen her grow up in this house. He had lived here with her parents too. The Andrews family had come to Oak Cottage on the 6th of April, 1922. Mighty Oak could not remember the name of the family he shared Oak Cottage with before the Andrews moved in, but it didn't matter, he would remember. Rose White was the eldest daughter of the Andrews, and after her parents had passed away, she stayed living at Oak Cottage. She loved it so much. In 1939, she married Ron White, who loved Oak Cottage as much as Rose, and they stayed. Mighty Oak was so pleased. He had come to love this family very much. Mighty Oak remembered how it seemed long after they were married that Ron White had to go to war. He was a soldier and served in the artillery. Suddenly, Mighty Oak's thoughts were broken. Something made him jump. He looked down to see what it was. Now, though he lived in the garden of Oak Cottage, he was so enormous, his long branches came over the fence into the park behind. A gentleman going to work had lost his umbrella in the high winds, and it had blown straight into the mighty tree's upper branches. He shook and swayed as hard as he could until he shook it loose. It dropped to the ground to the thankful owner. It was early spring, and this strong, wet, windy weather was nothing to the mighty tree. But to the baby leaves just coming through, it felt very windy for them. Not all the leaves had come out. One side of the tree was in the shade, as a tall fir tree lived next to Mighty Oak. So the leaves this side were always the last to shoot through. A couple of weeks later, the last leaf popped out. There was a robin sitting on the branch. He said, "Hello, who are you?" Well, Last Leaf looked around and realized that he indeed had been the very last leaf to shoot out. So he said, "Well, hello, and I'm Last Leaf. What's your name, Mr. Bird?" "Well, I am a robin, but my name is Robin, so you won't forget that, will you?" "No, I won't," said the greenest, youngest leaf. "Pleased to meet you, Robin." Then they both laughed. Robin and Last Leaf became great friends. They chatted to each other for hours. They both loved listening to the mighty tree's stories. They overlooked a park now with a dog walking area and a lovely park for children to play in with swings and a roundabout and a great big climbing frame made like a boat. Mighty Oak was telling them it used to be a cricket ground years ago. And just where the slide and roundabout was, that's where the changing rooms for the players. Well, half the building was changing rooms, and the other half was like a cafe. And there was much laughter that would come from that room, especially if the home team had won the cup. Then quite suddenly the cricket stopped, and Mighty Oak remembered it was quiet for a long time, and then the home guard would use the building for meetings, and he remembered them practicing marching around the green. Sometimes when Mighty Oak was telling them stories, he would seem to be sad with things he'd remembered over the years, and they would change the subject. One day they all laughed so much as a pigeon they knew who meant to land on the branch next to Robin and Last Leaf, but he missed his footing and he accidentally fell 4 branches lower. "Hello up there," he shouted. "Sorry, it's me, Clumsy. I just wanted to say hello." How they laughed at poor Clumsy. He rarely made it onto the right branch, and then when he landed so hard the whole branch would shake. They all enjoyed watching the children playing in the park and having fun. Last Leaf especially. He loved hearing the children's laughter, and it made him feel all warm inside. One day was worrying for them all. The mighty tree explained to them what happened as they were sleeping. Rose White had come into the garden to feed the birds. Well, she tripped on something and fallen in the garden. Mighty Oak felt so helpless. Of course, no one could hear him talk except animals, some very special adults, and young children. Well, luckily there was a young man walking his dog in the park, so Mighty Oak told the clever Alsatian what to do. The dog pulled his owner over to the fence and barked. Eventually the young man could hear Rose's cries, and he called for the ambulance. Mighty Oak thanked the dog, who said not at all, he was glad to help. His name was Marty, and any time the mighty tree needed help, he would be pleased to oblige. Then Mighty Oak said, actually, could you call everyone, squirrels, birds, foxes, and tell everyone to come to a meeting, please? I've got good news to tell them all. Right you are then, said the German shepherd. They all gathered around Mighty Oak's branches, which were full with birds, and around his great trunk there were rabbits, foxes, badgers, moles. Listen, everyone, said Mighty Oak, smiling warmly. I overheard Rose's sister on the telephone talking to Mark, Rose's son, who lives in America. They're all coming home to look after Rose and to live here. So, for a few years anyway, we still live with our family. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray, they all cheered. Now you had better all go out quickly before any humans see us talking, Mighty Oak said kindly but firmly. Oh, except you, Poppy. Anyone seen Poppy? A black and white fluffy cat meekly put his paw up. I'm here, he said, Mighty Oak, I'm here. Rose's sister has come to feed you and look after you until Rose comes out of hospital. Can you explain why she couldn't find you and was frantic with worry? She brought her silly parrot with her and it shouts at me. I don't like it, said Poppy. Poppy, I'm ashamed of you. Is it not our rule to be kind to everyone, even if we don't like them? Parrots are magnificent birds, beautiful birds, and they should be free and flying. Would that not make you a bit grumpy sometimes? Yes, I didn't think of it like that. I will go indoors now. Well done, Poppy, well done. Mighty Oak waited a few minutes, and then he heard Irene say, Oh, Poppy, there you are. I'm so pleased. Here's your dinner. The grape tree smiled to himself. Robin and Last Leaf were so excited. How much longer until they came home? It seemed like ages. Not much longer, said Robin. Clumsy clapped his wings excitedly and fell backwards off the branch. They all laughed. At last the day had come. Mark and his wife, Susan, whom Mighty Oak adored, and their children, Andrew, Daniel, and Lucy, were here. Robin got the giggles because he thought their accents were very funny. The great tree was so happy it meant the family he loved so much were going to carry on living here. He was excited to see Susan again. It had been about 4 years when he last saw her. She would always sit against the great trunk and talk to him. Of course, she couldn't hear him answer, but he loved her for that. Susan was an artist and she painted. She had done a beautiful painting of the mighty tree, and sometimes when Rose left the back door open, he could see it hanging on the wall, and it reminded him of Susan and what a lovely day that was when she painted him. Robin and Mighty Oak and Last Leaf were all so happy. Robin and Last Leaf were especially pleased for their great friend to be so happy, and it was the height of the summer. There were plenty of insects for Robin, and there had been enough rainfall for Last Leaf. Because the mighty tree was so huge, he had to have so much rain to soak in to the ground to feed his mighty roots. So rain was good for all of them. When it rained, Robin got a lot of juicy worms to eat, and this made poor Last Leaf feel quite ill. But Last Leaf put up with it because Robin did help, and if he had an insect crawling on him, and it did make him itch so, Robin would be glad to take it off and chomp away. So he was always willing to eat the pesky insects off of Last Leaf. After one heavy rainfall, Clumsy came to say hello, only he landed on the branch above by mistake. All the raindrops fell onto Robin. He got quite a shower. He was not happy. Last Leaf assured him it was an accident, and that poor Clumsy was so upset, and he didn't mean to do it as an accident. It was about 9 weeks later, and Last Leaf said to Robin, It's a bit chilly today. I know, said Robin. I thought that. Hey, that's funny. What? Asked Robin. Look at my brothers and sisters on the other side. They're not green like us. They look a funny colour. I know, said Robin sadly, suddenly realising it was nearly autumn. Where had all that time gone? When was he going to say to his dear friend? He quickly changed the subject as they watched the little girl was learning to ride her first bicycle. They knew they shouldn't laugh as she fell off for the 4th time. It looked so funny, and Mighty Oak said they were not really being cruel. Look, the little girl wasn't hurt, and anyway, look now, said Mighty Oak. There, the little girl has mastered it. Oh, they did cheer for her. A week later, and Susan was in the garden looking up at Mighty Oak. And she said, "Well, I suppose you're ready for fall now, my beautiful great oak. You're our handsome tree." She walked away quietly and carried on gardening. Last Leaf said to Robin, "Well, what does that mean, fall?" Robin had been dreading this. "I have to tell you something. Look at your brothers and sisters." So Last Leaf did just that. Oh my, he was shocked. A lot had gone, and the ones that had not gone were tan and brown and dry and curling up. He then looked at himself, and he was still green, but around the edge he was going brown. "What's happening, Robin? I'm scared." Robin tried to explain the best he could. "The lucky thing for you is this side is shaded, Last Leaf, so we're protected here. So we'll have longer together. It's warmer this side." Last Leaf thought for a moment. He did realize it was a natural cycle that happened every year to all his brothers and sisters, and after all, wasn't he the very last one, so he would be here longer. He cheered himself up and promised he would make the most of being with his best friend for however long he had left, and Mighty Oak still had lots of stories to tell them. Robin wondered every day if his dear friend would still be there. He would nervously fly to their branch. Last Leaf was still there, and he was actually the very last leaf on Mighty Oak. "Hello there, Robin. I'm still here, holding on tight. Luckily it's not windy today," Last Leaf said, smiling. "We may have one more week if we're lucky with the weather, Robin." Robin looked so relieved. "Yes, Just then, Clumsy landed heavily on their branch. Last Leaf fell silently to the ground. Robin said, "Goodbye, my friend." Clumsy said, "What was that, Robin?" "That," said Robin, with a great tear in his eye, "that was the last leaf."